So it's great to have all of you here for the fourth in our lecture series. There was a small deviation in our plan. We're supposed to speak about Chief Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, but Rabbi Ovadia Yosef will have to wait a little bit more for his colleague, Rabbi Shlomo Goren, as we have not finished discussing important parts of his life. First of all, I'd like to welcome my mother-in-law, who came especially for this lecture. So I'd like to give a big warm. They say behind every great man there is an astonished mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, I'm not a great man, but she's no exception. Thank you so much for coming, to my sister-in-laws as well. I'd like to thank Cantor Joseph Olavani from Fifth Avenue Synagogue for coming. And his wife Beatrice. They're close friends of Rabbi Goren, as well as many other dignitaries, the trustees of our synagogue, members, friends. Shalom, let's start. The lecture is sponsored in honor of Jeanette Meyerowitz and in loving memory of Paul Meyerowitz and Henry and Ruth Small. We thank them for their sponsorship. The lecture is also in memory of Leah Laura Nechomowitz, who is the mother of Esther Razer, who attended all the classes passionately. She lost her mother this past week. Mark, to you, may you see no more sorrow. She's a mother of two great educators of our school, your wife and Urit, and may this class also be in her memory. Rabbi Goren. I was asked by a few people who missed last week's lecture because they're on vacation to just summarize very quickly in 3 minutes what I've said for an hour and a half. I will not attempt to do so. But what's important to know, we discussed the unique background of Rav Goren. We discussed the fact that the differences between him, Rav Kook, and Rav Herzog. Bruce, you mind asking just to close the kitchen? Thanks. It's okay, just if we could close the door, that's fine. We discussed the differences between him and the previous chief rabbis in the upbringing. He grows up in a very difficult childhood after growing up in the bourgeoisie in Warsaw, in a well-to-do family. They move to Israel. They live in a kfar, in a moshav. The family never really makes it. He's a child prodigy. He goes to the best and greatest institution. He becomes a brilliant student, a scholar. He learns not only the Babylonian Talmud, becomes a great knowledge of the Jerusalem Talmud. Eventually, he becomes, as he enrolls in the Haganah. Later he enrolls in the Yirgun. He switches back to the Haganah. The state of Israel is founded, and he becomes the perfect go-to person to become the chief rabbi of the Hebrew armies of the state of Israel. And we discussed some of the stories that happened in 1948. We discussed the great dilemmas he had in terms of kosher, in terms of Shabbat, in terms of a decision of having one army or having two armies. Many wanted to have religious brigades and non-religious brigades. And he fought vehemently against it, and he succeeded. We discussed very briefly the great efforts he made in order to make sure how to solve the problem of agunot, the chained women who lose husbands in battles. And there's no way to prove that they died. And if they want to get remarried, what forms of proof could they use to be able to get remarried? I think this is one of the great photos of Rav Kook. He's young. He's wearing his military uniforms. Someone's listening. This is one of the great photos of Rav Goren. He's young. He's looking at you with his piercing eyes, wearing his favorite rabbinic garb, which is the soldier's uniform of the IDF. We're going to start the second part of the lecture. In 1948, as the war is going on, this old city falls to the Jordanians. One of his first assignments as the chief rabbi is to go to the old city. The Jewish residents of the old city are kicked out. Those who survive, the Jordanians make a selection between those who they think could fight, and they put them into prison, and old people and young kids they let go. This is a photo of Jews leaving the Zion Gate in 1948. And Rav Goren comes there as the chief rabbi of the IDF. They send him and they tell him, try to do what you can. And you have to understand, all these people who are leaving the Jewish quarter are people who have nowhere to live. And he sees some of the great scholars sitting on the floors with their torn clothing. And he sees Jerusalem in its disgrace. And he remembers the verse from Lamentations, written by Jeremiah. Yishvu la'aretz yidmu ziknei bat Zion, helu afar al rosham chagru sakin. Silence sit on the ground, the elders of Zion. And he's looking at these great scholars who are sitting on the floor. And it hurts him so much. Now it's a very interesting thing. We think of a chief rabbi of the army. It's not just a chaplain. In Jewish tradition, there is a historic role for spiritual leadership. We all know about the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. But there was called, in the hierarchy of the Jewish state, of the biblical Jewish state, there was a position called Kohen Mashuach Milchama. And he was pretty high up. You had the king, you had the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, you had the Rosh Sanhedrin, and just up there was Kohen Mashuach Milchama. There was a designated high priest who was supposed to give a pep talk to the soldiers as they went to war. It's a fascinating thing. The best parts of the movies of Greek wars is the pep talk that Alexander the Great or Achilles or Hector give to their soldiers. It's how do you inspire people who are leaving their family and children to go fight. And actually, we're going to be reading it's here in Deuteronomy, these week's Parshiot. Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. Is there anyone who has built a new house? The 3 exemptions from fighting in the Jewish war. Pay attention, maybe you're exempt too. Has anyone who has built a new house in the Hamptons but has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another dedicate it. Maybe he's not focused on battle. If there's anyone who planted a vineyard but has never harvested it, let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another man will harvest it. Is there anyone who has paid the bride price for a wife? This is a bad translation. I copied it from the internet. If anyone got engaged to a woman, but who has not yet married her, let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle, another marry her. You know why in the first year of marriage you're forbidden to fight? You're sent back home. One of my friends told me it's because you can't fight 2 battles at the same time. ויאספו השוטרים לדבר אל העם ואמרו מי האיש הירא וירך הלבב ילך וישוב לביתו ולא ימס את לבב אחיו כלבבו. There was another exemption. If you're scared, go home. If you have fear, go home. We don't need you. It's in the Torah. Now, part of the fascinating thing with Rav Goren, he loves the chief rabbinate of the army. First of all, it's uncharted territory. This is a startup in the rabbinic world. Speaking, if you get a job as the chief rabbi of Vilna in 1850, you're basically continuing the existence. He is in uncharted territory. And as we discussed, the laws of warfare have not been studied practically for 2,000 years. You had a soldier, you had private soldiers who were in the British army, in the Russian army. The Chafetz Chaim wrote a book called Machaneh Israel to Jewish soldiers in the Russian Tsarist army, how to deal with certain questions. But again, the army was not Jewish. It was individuals asking questions how to behave. But this is uncharted territory. One of his first rulings in 1948 before Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Goren says, even though you're not supposed to walk beyond 2,000 cubits from your town, even to hear a shofar, as the Talmud says, it's a rabbinic prohibition. You're not supposed to unless you have a roof tchumin. He gave permission to soldiers who were in a camp with no one who could blow a shofar. You don't have Rabbi Einsider at every single army base. That they would be able to walk and go to a different army base in order to hear the shofar. He gets attacked by many establishment rabbis, and then he quotes to them a Mishnah in Eruvin that's not well known, that there are 4 exemptions for people during wartime. First of all, you're allowed to take wood for heating. It's not considered theft. You're not obligated to wash hands. You're allowed to take food that is questionable whether it was given trumot masrot, given the proper ties, or given off from it. And also, you're not obligated with the mitzvah of eruv. Again, he's discovering mishnayot that did not have a practical. We're not practical for 2,000 years, and he loves the process. Yom Kippur, a big question comes up: are soldiers obligated? 1948, many religious, traditional soldiers wanted to know: are we obligated to fast? He did not want to take the responsibility on himself. He goes and he speaks to the chief rabbis, Rabbi Herzog and Rabbi Ben Sion Chai Uziel, and they come together to the conclusion: anyone who's actively participating at battle is permitted to eat. If he's able to eat less than the biblical prohibition of shiurim, which means less than an ounce of water, liquid, or what's the opposite of liquid? Solid. Thank you very much. That's what happens when you have a Russian assistant rabbi. Less than approximately an ounce of a liquid and a solid ounce every 8-9 minutes in intervals. It's not considered the biblical prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur. But again, obviously, if you're standing and so someone's shooting at you and you're not going to start measuring how much water, but you take a sip. But anyone who is not in active battle, is not actively participating in a battle, let's say someone is at a guard post, as long as he's feeling fine, he's obligated to fast. And he sends out again. He's sending out, he becomes lieutenant colonel in the army. He's able to send out decrees. He gets approved. His office is right next to David Ben Gurion. So, he becomes a voice for the thousands and thousands of soldiers who want to know how to act and how to behave. One of the most difficult things that he has to do is regarding burial. And the importance that Israel, the state of Israel, gives to promise every single soldier, whether even soldiers who have fell in battle, to bring them back lekever Israel, to bring them back to Jewish burial, is phenomenal. No other country in the world will exchange hundreds of terrorists to get maybe 1 or 2 or 3 bodies back of their soldiers. A lot of it has to do with the amazing courage that Rabbi Goren, and I think this is one of the highlights of his life, the amount of danger he put himself in to be able to determine the life or death of certain soldiers, and with miracles to bring them back, some of them, maybe not all of them, and those who they find back, maybe they sometimes just find a few bones. But to be able to give the parents a place where they could come and pray for their child. Kis Fallujah, it's a battle where many Jewish soldiers get the pocket of Fallujah. Many Jewish soldiers get killed, and he demands to go to speak to the Egyptians to try to get back their bodies. You have to understand, of course, you have bodies behind enemy lines. You're not able to get them back. You have to negotiate with the enemy. The question is, how important is it for the army or for the state that's in shambles? The army is just getting itself together. If you know the state of the IDF army in 1948, it had many great problems, and retrieving bodies was not at the top of the agenda. Rav Kook makes it the height of the agenda, and to always personally to go get it back. Rav Goren. Rav Goren after long negotiations, the Egyptians pick him up, and guess who's picking him up? The Egyptian general. His name is Jamal Abdel El Nasser, who later becomes the president of Egypt, and he picks him up on a jeep, and he takes him across. There's a border between the Israelis and the Egyptians. He takes him across, and he's driving sideways, in zigzag as they call it in Hebrew. Rabbi Goren asks him, how come you're not driving straight? He says, we have many mines here that we placed that we want to do against the Israelis. And there are many mines Israelis put here. So I'm trying to drive around. So Rav Kook looks at him and says, are you kidding me? Rav Goren looks at him and he says, are you kidding me? When I was in school and we learned mathematics and geometry, the shortest line is a straight line. So if you're in a danger place, just drive straight. That's you can avoid most problems. So Nasser answers them, we never think straight. We always think crooked. That's what he tells him. He brings him in. He has to find out about the Alexandroni. This is about 86 religious soldiers who fall in battle. And there's nothing left. And they wanted to find out whether all of them have been killed. And he speaks to them and negotiates with them. In other battles, he goes literally with Jordanians. He doesn't get the privilege of a jeep escort. And they tell him, if you want to retrieve bodies, you have to come by yourself. And the IDF has its own problems. And he decides that if he doesn't put his most to this, it's just going to fall off the face of the earth, this claim, the parents. And he jumps from stone to stone in a minefield, risking his own life in order to be able to retrieve a body back for parents. And he keeps the letters that parents write to him. He becomes the address of parents who lose their children. Rabbi Goren, please give us the dignity of finding something that we could bring back, that we could pray to for our children. And you have to understand, it shapes very much who he is. These kind of requests, again, as we discussed, every rabbi is a product of his community. Every rabbi is a product of the questions he's being asked and the tasks he's given. These are the tasks he's given. A lot of times when soldiers fall in battle, they make makeshift cemeteries. Do you keep them in the cemeteries they're already placed in, or you transport them to Jerusalem? It was also a huge debate amongst many people. This is, it's known the Lamed Hay, the 35 who were lost. And this is finally when they were able to get back some of their bodies. And again, very often he's taken with they're tying his eyes because they don't want him to be able to see anything. He's going to enemy lines. One of the times he's going to retrieve bodies, he goes to the officer next to him and he tells him, before he leaves, I'm making you a shaliach to give a get to my wife if I don't come back. Just think about it. He was scared he's going to get killed. He's saying vidui. And he says, just in case I don't come back and you don't know what happens to me, I want you to give my wife a divorce bill that she'll be able to remarry. This is what a young rabbi is thinking about. Again, no one asked him, no one forced him to do this. He does this on his own initiative. And he writes that one of these times, they're putting bodies together. And these 35 warriors, they were mutilated by the enemy Arabs. And in order to place them, he tries to put their legs and hands together somehow, the skull, the pelt. He tries to put them together, but as they're putting it on the jeep, it's in a desert place, the bodies are getting all thrown around, and he feels very badly. But Rav Goren he used to learn 7 pages of Talmud every single day. Now listen, this is an incredible feature. The same day, as he's on the trip, going back, taking bodies, feeling terrible that he didn't do more, that the bodies are in a better condition, he reads a Mishnah in Talmud Shkalim that speaks about vessels. Which vessels are pure, which vessels are impure. If you found a vessel on the way to the mikveh, was it already placed in the mikveh or not? And what happens with a vessel called a meritza? A meritza was a vessel that they would place, when someone would die, they would place it into a coffin. And Maimonides explains that if someone was tall or short, they had to fit it in. They would use a tool to push it in. into the coffin. And he read about it the same day as he's bringing those coffins. He says, that gave me comfort, because this is what was done before. There was a two-step burial back in the day. Another time, he's going to retrieve, I think it was Gush Etzion, almost 150 soldiers get killed. They surrendered. Usually after you surrender, international law forbids you from shooting, but you have to take them and you take them to captivity, you have rights. They surrendered but got murdered. One of them was badly injured. He was placed in Bethlehem. He dies. Later on, the nuns who were taking care of him in the hospital didn't know what to do. They buried him without any religious ceremony. 2 years later, Rav Goren is allowed to come into Bethlehem to retrieve his body. And what is Rav Goren thinking about? This is his chance to go to pray at Kever Rachel, to pray at the tomb of Rachel. And the person who's in charge, through international efforts to take him into Bethlehem, he starts telling him, how about make a little turnover here? I just want to stop for a few minutes to pray, mincha or something, at the tomb of Rachel. He says, are you kidding me? He takes out a sign and he says that I'm personally responsible to the Prime Minister of Transjordan to bring you back safely. If not, I'm going to go to prison. He says, how many dinars is it going to take? How many liras do I have to pay? After he gives him a bribe, he already talks a whole different language. Okay, Rabbi Goren, we'll make a deal. I'm not going to let you leave the car. He was driving an old Ford car. Listen to this. But we'll come to the tomb, and I'll park to the back, and you'll have 2-3 minutes to pray. They do so, and Rav Goren says the heavens were smiling towards me, because after 2 minutes of praying, the driver says, let's go, and the car doesn't start. Now, when you're an Israeli general stuck in Beit Lechem, other people will be a little bit nervous. Rav Goren said, I had the same exact car as he did. It was an old Ford. And I knew exactly how to start it. He had no clue. So I wasn't nervous about getting out. So meanwhile, he goes into the Rachel's tomb, he prays, and after an hour, he still can't figure out how to get out. But some locals start realizing there's an Israeli general, and people are gathering together. Again, he bribes 2 people in a kiosk to shake up the car, like he knows. There used to be a joke in Russia. There's the new Russians who became very wealthy quickly. And they bought the new cars, the Mercedes. And Russia's known for many things. They're not known for good cars. The worst Russian car, none of the best Russian cars are also not so good. The worst Russian car is called the Zaporozhets. So they say a new Russian is speaking to an old Russian. The new Russian tells him, I bought a new car, Mercedes. You press this button, this happens. You press that button, the roof goes off. Another button, there's an AC, a third button, this door opens. And the guy who owns the Zaporozhets tells him, in my car, I close 1 door and 3 open. He shakes up the car starts, and they're gone. They go back. He's in the army, and he got a command from the Central Command that every single base has to be kosher, every single base has to have a synagogue. And he's going from brigade to brigade, making sure that everything is enforced. Well, he goes to the paratroopers. And commander of one of the young commanders, his name was Ariel Sharon. And Arik Sharon looks at Rabbi Goren and he says, with all due respect, Rabbi, we have no religious people in our brigade. And therefore we have no need in a synagogue because no one will pray in a synagogue. And therefore we don't need a kosher kitchen because no one will eat any kosher food. Rabbi Goren said, what if you have a religious man in your brigade? He says, so then I would do it, of course. So Rabbi Goren said, I'll be your first religious soldier. Rabbi Goren joins the paratroopers. And he jumps off. He writes extensively about jumping from a plane. He was scared the first time. He breaks his leg. He's 3 weeks. He's injured. Then they forbade him to jump from a parachute. Rabbi, you got to focus on what you got to do. But Arik Sharon made his base kosher. 1956, the Sinai War. This is the Suez Canal. A lot of tensions. Again, this is a war that's also in cahoots with England and France. He plays similar roles. And he takes this opportunity when Israel conquers Sinai for the very first time. What is he going to do? He's going to blow the shofar on Har Sinai. Just to understand what's happening. Again, it's debatable where Har Sinai is. This is a later photo from 1967. But when he went there in 1956, he didn't have a camera with him. Again, he finds the mountain, and he's in competition with Rechavam Zev. He also wants to climb the mountain. He climbs it first, puts a Israeli flag, and blows the shofar. He decides that in that place that he will start writing a Torah scroll on Har Sinai, in the place where the Torah is given. Again, you have to understand, Rabbi Goren sees himself as playing as a historic figure in the history of the Jewish people. This is him starting to write a Sefer Torah in Har Sinai over a decade later. 1967. Now this is just some basic, very small, I can't even call this a brief history of the Six-Day War, but just to give a little bit of background. As you know, all the surrounding Arab countries were strengthening very anti-Semitic rhetoric against Israel. The head of that rhetoric is that young officer who later became the president of Egypt by the name of Nasser. Look at him, this is him speaking at a rally, again spewing anti-Semitism, spewing hatred, the annihilation of the Jewish state. The words, we get used to hearing these words, but you speak to anyone who was in Israel pre-1967, those weeks of May, they remember the fear. And I wasn't there. How many of you were there during that time? He tells, again, a big role into the beginning of the war is when the Egyptians asked the UN to evacuate the Straits of Tiran, which is the only entryway into the port of Eilat. They close it for all ships entering Israel. Again, he asked the UN to leave. The UN leaves. Again, Israel is alone. And Goren writes about this is his. Sometimes you could play music all your life, and then you have one song that really makes it to the big hit list. And it's possible to say that the Six-Day War is probably the most monumental days in the life of Rav Goren in many ways. Levi Eshkol is the prime minister. He's considered to be a weaker prime minister than Ben Gurion. He gave a horrible speech to the nation when the whole nation was already scared. It was called Ne'um Agim Gumim, literally the stuttering speech. There was enormous pressure upon him to make a unity government. Eventually he asked Moshe Dayan to join as his Minister of Defense. Rabbi Goren at this time is in Australia. And again, this is in his words. And he hears what's happening and he wants to know if he should come back to the United States. He calls up the chief of staff, who is at that time?
United States or Israel?
To Israel.
To Israel. He flies back through the United States. That's how I used to get from Australia to Israel. Who does he call up? Who's the chief of staff during the Six-Day War? Yitzchak Rabin. He said, Yitzchak Rabin, should I come back? Is it important? Rabin says, you should decide on your own. You have to, it's interesting, you're reading in Rabbi Goren's memoirs. He took this conversation very seriously. And the last thing Rabin was nervous about at the eve of the Six-Day War, whether the chief rabbi is coming back or not. But Rav Goren felt important. I have to call up Rabin and see, do you need me? Should I come back? Decide on your own. Rav Goren decides he's going to come back. And at the last gathering in Australia, he tells the Jewish people, I believe I will be at the Kotel within a very short time. He flies back through the United States. What's the closest Jewish community to JFK? The 5 towns. He speaks at the White Shul on the Shabbat of the eve of the Six-Day War. And again, he tells everyone, don't fear, we will have the Kotel back in our hands, which is almost prophetic at that time. Now, Yitzchak Rabin is back. This is a photo of Yitzchak Rabin and Arik Sharon. This is the slimmer version of Arik Sharon. Yitzchak Rabin had a problem. So Yitzchak Rabin at this point is very demoralized. Ben Gurion was very upset at Yitzchak Rabin for calling up all the reserves. He felt that you're just you're making it worse. You're going to escalate the whole situation. Yitzchak Rabin has to convince the government to give him permission to go to war. Eshkol doesn't want to give permission to go to war before he has the support of Moshe Chaim Shapiro and Zerach Varhaftig, who are the religious members of his cabinet. The Minister of Interior Affairs, Moshe Chaim Shapiro, and Zerach Varhaftig. These are two leaders of the religious Zionist movement. And Rabin sends Rav Goren to convince them to vote for the war in the cabinet, in the government. So Rabin doesn't just want to go, he goes to speak to his, he gets a command. Usually in the army you're supposed to follow orders. With Rav Goren it's always more complicated. He decides he's going to ask generals, he's going to go down to feel the people. Are they ready for war? He goes to speak to Major General Israel Tal from the 84th Division. Tal is extremely pessimistic. He says the Jordanians there's only 9 miles of Israel separating us in the midland. The Jordanians are going to split the land into 2. We should prepare to have a northern state of Israel and a southern state of Israel with 2 separate governments. That's the only way we're going to be able to go through this war. If we would have started a week ago before Nasser brought in 80,000 troops and 1,000 tanks into the Sinai, we would have a better chance. He gets mad. And Rav Goren gets mad when he hears anything that has anything to do with fear. It bothers him tremendously. He goes to Shmuel, Gonen known as Gorodish, and he asked him, what's your opinion? He said, should have we attacked a week ago? He said, you're kidding me? It's much better now. Because now Nasser brought all of his troops. We don't have to go look for them. Now they're all here. And Rav Goren says, that's the answer I like. I'm going to convince the ministers of the religious Zionist movement to vote for the war. He also goes to Moti Hod, deserves a lot of the credit. He was the commander of the Israeli Air Force. And he also speaks to them before the 6-day war. He also gives them an upbeat. We will have the Egyptian Air Force crushed within 48 hours. He ended up doing much better than that, but he promised 48 hours. Gordish said we within a short period of time will be able to get to the Suez. So he goes back to convince them, and they tell him, listen, we asked Rabin if we're definitely going to win, and Rabin says he can't answer that question. He says, what do you mean he didn't answer that question? And Rabbi Goren goes to scream at Rabin, how come you say we're not going to win? And then he tells him what happened with Ben Gurion. He tells the ministers what he have heard, and he says, the soldiers are ready to fight, you have to support the effort of the war. As the war begins, the first day he joins, he says, I'm not going to be sitting in my office when the soldiers are at war. I will be in battle whenever Israeli soldiers are at battle. He goes to the Gaza border. That was one of the southern borders with Egypt. And he relates in his memoirs that he remembers the verse from the book of Judges of Samson. Now, Samson is a pretty good example of a powerful, strong Jewish judge who at the end of the days was captured by the Philistines, and they blind him and they tie him to 2 poles. And the verse in Shoftim says, "Ve'inakma nekam echat mishtei enai mipilishtim." God, let me avenge 1 eye. Don't let me avenge 2 eyes. Let me avenge at least 1 eye. And Shlomo Goren says, I felt like I was avenging the 2nd eye of Samson. But again, when you read Goren's memoirs, he's speaking about himself as a continuation. There was a joke, I'll tell you that joke later. The joke goes that he wanted to have a book in the Bible named after. And he came to God and he said, God, he served together with Chief Rabbi Ovadia Yosef as Chief Rabbi. This joke goes, he goes to God, he says, God, I want you to put me into the Bible. And God tells Rabbi Goren, Rabbi Goren, you're a Talmid Chacham, you know that there are only 24 books in the Bible. And all of those 24 books are taken. Which one should I take out? Rabbi Goren says, take out Ovadia. It's a joke. But every joke has a piece of truth in it. He sees himself in a historic role. Monday, June 5, day 1. This is a photo, 7 a.m. Israel decides to do the only thing they could do in order to have any chance of winning the war, is attacking the Egyptian Air Force and commanding total air superiority throughout the war. Within 2 hours, almost the entire Egyptian Air Force is gone. At this time, Rabbi Goren is fighting. He's fighting at the southern border. He writes a letter to all of the soldiers of the IDF, and he delivers it also on Kol Yisrael on the Israeli radio. With thanks to God, this victory day, the 26th of Iyar 5727 on the Jewish calendar. Soldiers of Israel Defense Forces on land, on sea, and in the air, may God be with you, courageous soldiers. Hear, O Israel, you draw near today to do battle against your enemies. The great day for the Jewish people is upon us, and your steps today towards the great and decisive campaigns for the salvation of Israel from its enemies who have risen up against Israel to eradicate us and destroy us. The eyes of all Israel are raised to you, dear soldiers. Let not your hearts faint. Fear not and do not tremble, nor be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is He that goes with you, to fight with you against your enemies, to save you. On this day, give us strength. On this day, make us great. On this day, subdue our enemies under us. Destroy them from under the heavens of the Lord, and may your enemies fall before you by the sword. Be strong and of good courage for our people and for the cities of God. And with the help of God, of the God of the wars of Israel, you will merit to have great success over all Israel's enemies. Let all your enemies perish, O Lord, and Israel will dwell in safety in His hand. And you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. Go with your strength and save Israel. We beseech you, O Lord, save us. We beseech you, O Lord, make us prosper. In a way, Rabbi Goren becomes that Kohen Meshuach Milchama. He becomes that priest giving inspiration to Jewish soldiers. On June 5, the same day, he's in battle, and his battalion gets attacked, and he had a feeling that Jerusalem will be redeemed, and he takes with him his favorite item, which is the shofar, and he takes also a Torah scroll with him into battle. And at this time, he's literally at battle. And he uses his handkerchief to cover up a soldier who's bleeding with his own hands. He digs a hole to hide the Torah scroll as he's walking with soldiers into battle. Finally, when he gets a chance, when he hears the news that the Israelis are attacking the Jordanians as well, and there is a chance that Israel will regain the old city, you all know where Rabbi Goren, where does he want to be? Well, you want to be where the show is happening. Okay, for Rabbi Goren, and let's just remind you a story from 1928, when his family arrives penniless in Jerusalem, and they have nowhere to sleep. Do you remember that story?
They go to the Kotel first.
His father comes. They go from Kfar Hasidim, and the first thing his father does before they have a home, he takes them to the Kotel. And a 10-year-old child, Goren, Shlomo Gorenchik, remembers that. And the Kotel, for him, always remains a very personal, important place. During the 19 years between 48 and 67, he has many failed attempts to try to reach the Kotel illegally. And this is Motagur. Now Motagur is, Freddie, you mind coming over? Motagur is the commander of the paratroopers who were freeing the old city. And there's a lot of deadly battles. At the end of the day, he's sitting there at the gates of the old city. He's waiting for the command to attack the old city. And he does not have permission. The government is negotiating. You know, they're trying to tell the Jordanians, if you're willing to back out, we're going to let you keep the old city and the Temple Mount. For Rabbi Shlomo Goren, this is a nightmare. And he goes over to Motagur and he says, let's go in. And they don't give you permission, who cares? And Motagur says, are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind? He says, if we go to jail, I'll go with you to jail. And he speaks and he tells them again, for him, he has Jewish history next to his eyes his whole life. He tells Mota, this is your chance. Jewish history will not forgive you if you don't do this. If you're not going to take this opportunity to take the old city of Jerusalem, you'll be remembered to shame in the pages of Jewish history. But Mota Gur, as persuasive as Rabbi Goren is, he says, listen, I'm a soldier, and I follow commands. And he denies. Rabbi Goren goes crazy. He goes, speaks to Yaakov Herzog, who is the chief of staff of Levi Eshkol. He tells him, you got to convince Eshkol to do this. And meanwhile, in the middle of the night, they make a decision, the government makes a decision that in the morning, they will go and free the old city. Now, the shofar of Rabbi Goren explodes. The shofar of Rabbi Goren explodes in the Yaza, in the Yaza battle in the south the day before. He goes to take another shofar from his father-in-law. He says, give me your shofar, today we're going to free Jerusalem. And as he enters with the soldiers in Sha'ar HaArayot, the Lion's Gate, this is the photo of the Israeli paratroopers, soldiers entering the old city. He is with them going hand in hand. Very luckily, there's someone who works for Kol Yisrael, came with a tape recorder, and is with him for those decisive moments. Then, as they come, they first go to the Temple Mount. The Mugarby Gate is the gate. I'm sure you all know the bridge. This is called the Mugarby Bridge. This is the gate today that Jews enter to the Temple Mount through. For him, the shofar, again, is the verses that didn't mean anything for so long. When you are at war in your land against the aggressor who attacks you, you shall sound short blasts on the trumpets, that you may be remembered before the Lord your God and be delivered from your enemies. And it's interesting that shofar, today is the first day we blew shofar. We'll speak about the importance of shofar in a moment. Har Bayit B'Yadeinu. They finally conquer the Temple Mount, and these are 57 seconds that every Jew should hear at least once in his life. So we'll play the recording of Mota Gur announcing of the capturing of the Temple Mount. You see, Rabbi Goren? There are a few things that we heard in this video. You heard Har Bayit B'Yadeinu, the words of Mota Gur when they capture the Temple Mount, that are entrenched in Jewish history. You see Rav Goren walking in with a Torah scroll with the soldiers, and he's saying the prayer of Nachem. This is one of the greatest photos of him blowing the shofar in those first moments. Now, how many of you have seen this photo? How many of you have seen this photo? The contrast between the two photos. You know, many people say that the soldiers took off their helmets out of a sign of respect. You have extremely secular soldiers who, as in a Christian gesture, you take off your head covering in a sign of respect for a holy place. And then the second before, you have Rav Goren who's holding a Torah scroll and blowing the shofar upon the same moment. And this shows you where the state of Israel is at. This shows you the distance, in a way, of the religious and the secular. You know, just culturally, as you approach this moment. Rav Goren writes about the moments that he's at the Temple Mount. You're forbidden to go into the Holy of Holies. There's one permission when you're at war. Again, when you're at war, there's a different set of rules. Rav Goren knows this is his only opportunity to walk into the place of the Holy of Holies. Again, he takes his shofar, he takes the Torah scroll, he goes into the mosque, and he blows the shofar. He tells the soldiers to sing Hatikva, but they say, no, we want to sing a new song. Today it's not a new song, today it's 50 years old. Yerushalayim Shel Zahav by Naomi Shemer. When he comes, after he's by the Har Bayit, he goes down through the Mugrabi gate to the Kotel. And there's a sign that says El Burak. El Burak was the donkey, the horse of Prophet Muhammad. And he takes an Uzi gun and he breaks the sign and he starts prayers. He's davening Shacharis, he's davening Mincha, he's davening Mariv, he's saying Hallel, he's reading the Torah. He says the prayer, he's picked up on the shoulders of soldiers, dancing with them. This is Rav Goren giving a very sweaty kiss to Uzi Narkis, who is also one of the great IDF generals. Nachem is the prayer that Jews have said for a very long time about the destruction of the temple. We say it once a year on Tisha B'Av. Rav Goren says the prayer of Nachem and he changes the wording. Nachem Hashem Elokeinu et avelei Tzion v'et avelei Yerushalayim ha'ir ha'avela v'chareva. This desolate, destroyed, mourning city. And he changes those words, this joyful, joyous, happy city. And he wanted to create a new version for the prayer for Jews to say. How could we say that Jerusalem is completely destroyed? Jerusalem is being rebuilt, Jerusalem is reunited. But most other rabbinic authorities said, we still do not have the temple, therefore we cannot change the prayer, because the Tisha B'Av prayer is based on the destruction of the temple. This is an important photo for everyone to see, because this was the size of the Kotel Plaza in 1967, which literally had a place for maybe 100 people to stand, 200 people. What they did afterwards, they literally erased entire neighborhood in order to create the Western Wall Plaza the way we know it. And he goes, 11 soldiers are going with Rav Goren, and again, during this time, he's so excited. He's like a little child in a candy shop. And at times, commanders and generals are telling him, some soldier, please push Rav Goren to the wall because they're shooting. And Rabbi Goren responded in a very Rav Goren way. He said, I'm the highest commander here, so don't give me orders where to go. But again, he was more of a rabbi than a soldier. He goes, he sees the Churva synagogue. The Churva synagogue is when Rav Herzog was appointed as chief rabbi of Israel, that's where he gave his inauguration speech. And he sees it destroyed. Today it's beautifully rebuilt. And he's crying, he sees the destroyed old city. After that, he's not done yet. Rav Goren is just getting started. He goes the same day as they're continuing to go into what some people call the West Bank and other people call Judea and Samaria. He's going to Rachel's tomb. And he said that when he was at Rachel's tomb all those years ago, retrieving back the body, he was able to remember where the entrance is. And he goes there. You have to understand, the soldiers' top priority, the generals' top priorities are not the holy places. They're trying to be able to create defensible borders for the state of Israel. Rabbi Goren, for him, this is a religious war. This is redemption. Rabbi Goren sees Isaiah in front of him. He doesn't see the New York Times that's describing where's Israel at. For him, this is the war. This is what the war is about. And he remembers the verse, the famous verse of Jeremiah about when the Jewish people left the first exile after the destruction of the first temple. Thus said the Lord, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. And these are the Jewish people who are leaving through Beit Lechem, through the burial place of Rachel. And Rachel, as she sees the Jews leaving, she's crying, she's weeping for them. Thus said the Lord, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares the Lord. They shall return to the enemy's land. There is hope for your future, for your children, declares the Lord. Your children shall return to their country. And Rabbi Goren, who is a great Torah scholar, knew that there was a Zohar that said that will happen in midnight. And when Rav Goren arrives at the Rachel's tomb, it's 11:15 at night. And he's trying to open the lock. And there are many locks. The Arabs kept everything locked for a long time. And at a certain point, after a while, trying to break in, he hears a noise of something falling nearby. And it was a keychain. The caretaker of the tomb decided to help him out. Threw it to him. And he opens the tomb of Rachel. He says those verses and he looks at his watch. It's 12 o'clock at night. So you tell me, if you would be in Rav Goren's shoes, would you feel what he feels? Thursday, June 9th, Nasser goes in front of Egyptian TV. He resigns. And he actually admits defeat. Of course, the Egyptians say he can't resign. He rescinds the resignation later. But now the war turns to the Golan Heights. This is not enough for Rav Goren. He goes to Marat HaMechpelah. He goes to the Marat HaMechpelah, the cave of the patriarchs. And again, for him this is a rendezvous because he was there once with his engaged young bride Sophia years before. And he's now returning to those graves. Now Rav Goren knew one thing. He knew that there's a very good chance Israel will have to return the holy sites back in a future agreement. So Rav Goren is already fighting at the first moment to be able to create uvdot bashetach, facts on the ground. And he makes sure to put an Israeli flag. He does a few other things. He puts a Torah scroll and he puts bima in the Ohel Yitzchak, which was where the Muslim had built a mosque. So he didn't feel comfortable making a shul inside a mosque, so he made it outside where was the women's gallery in the mosque. That's where he made his makeshift first synagogue in the Marat HaMechpelah. Friday, June 10th, Israel is not ready to complete the war before they have the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is strategically important for Israel because of the highland, and Israelis were been attacked for decades before. And finally, the war is over. The first Shabbat, he goes back to Jerusalem for the first Shabbat. They prohibit Jews to come to the Kotel because they want to make arrangements. He saw that there was a partition at the Kotel where Arabs used to urinate at the Kotel. So he demands people to clean up. He finds people to clean that up. Even though they're prohibited people to come to the Kotel, many people are trying to make their ways anyways. He makes a minyan at the Kotel and he changes the maftir. He adds his own maftir from Parashat Ekev. He changes the haftarah to a joyous haftarah. It was Parashat Naso. Again, he doesn't have any fears of changing traditional things. Saturday night, right after that Shabbat, he goes up to the Golan because he has to identify personally 90 bodies of dead Israeli soldiers. And he stays up all night until 4 p.m. personally identifying every single dead body that comes from the Golan in order to make sure that they're identified and brought to proper burial. The aftermath is that Israel owns more land than it ever did before. It has the Sinai, it has the Golan. Israel has complete victory. Moshe Dayan, who's the Minister of Defense, returns the Temple Mount to the Waqf, the Muslim Waqf, which definitely doesn't make a happy camper of Rav Goren, who goes wild. Moshe Dayan calls in Rav Goren and he tells him three things. Number one, go back to the cave of the patriarchs, take off the Israeli flag, take out the synagogue that you have built there, take out the Torah scroll. And number three, no Jews will be allowed to pray in there. Or they'll only be allowed to come up to the seventh step, since it's a mosque. And if any Jew wants to come pray in there, they'll have to take off their shoes as respect to the Muslim religion. Rav Goren gives a speech to Moshe Dayan that no other general would ever give. First of all, he says he knew that Moshe Dayan always, even when he heard criticism, he said, this is what you think, and this is what I think, and I'm in charge, so you go do what I do. So Rav Goren decided, I'll scream at Moshe Dayan, and as soon as I'm done, I'll run out of his office. He tells him, how dare you? You're going to destroy what we have accomplished in the 6-day war. These are miracles of God, and you're going to give it up. Again, he uses history. History is his best friend. Jewish history will not forgive you if you get it back. He says, I'll resign from the army. By the way, Rav Goren tried to resigning multiple times from the army. He writes about Benjamin of Tuleda, who wrote literally he traveled between 1160 and 1170 in Israel. Is one of the greatest chroniclers of Jewish communities in the 12th century. And he writes that the Ark of the Cave of the Patriarchs was a synagogue until the 12th century. So he writes proof this is a synagogue. This is just the last 800 years is just a little small pause, but really it's a shul. He wants to bring back his yeshiva, his alma mater, the Hebron Yeshiva, where also I had the privilege of studying, which was in Hebron until 1929. And after the massacre, and most of the students, and many of the students got killed, they left to Jerusalem. He tries to convince the head of the yeshiva to bring it back to Hebron. And he brings the Rosh Yeshiva of Yecheskel Sarna, and he looks around and he says, I can't do it. I can't take the responsibility. I saw one pogrom in my lifetime, I can't afford to see another one. And here you see two opposing approaches. How much are we willing to risk to gain land? How much are we willing to risk to have important holy sites of Israel? And the more Haredim, at the end of the day, they're not willing to take any risks when it comes to that. For them, it's secondary. What's on first place for Rav Goren, for the Haredi world, is on second place. For them, they're not ushering the redemption. When God will decide to bring the Messiah will come. This is not our job to intervene, playing a more passive role. And Rav Goren, whose majority of his colleagues do not view things like him, this is a lifelong struggle. This is Moshe Dayan entering the Old City. Now, while they had the Temple Mount, Rabbi Goren hires the engineering corps of the army to take measurements of the Temple Mount. Again, the state of Israel is fighting for its survival. The chief rabbi of the IDF is trying to figure out the measurements of the Temple Mount, where the temple stood, to figure out where you're allowed to walk in impurity and where you're not allowed to walk into impurity. When Rav Goren is trying to get the engineering corps to do the same thing with the Ma'arat HaMechpelah, with the Cave of the Patriarchs, Moshe Dayan gives an opposing order to forbid it. He says no, because Goren thought he wanted to dig beneath to see what's happening there. So his wishes were not granted. Look, B'tziruf Mapot Me'utkanot, he writes a book about Har HaBayit, Rav Goren, and he writes that I have very recent maps of the Temple Mount. And it hurts him that Nebi Samuel, that's the tome of Shmuel Hanavi, Joseph's tome, you could see it was destroyed a few times, which also is in Shechem and Nablus. There's an old synagogue in Jericho. The bottom picture has swastikas on it. Again, for him it hurts. For him it's Judea and Samaria. For him this is the birthplace of the Jewish people. And it bothered him, the highlight of his life is 1967. In many ways it goes downhill from there. Because he's ushering in the redemption. He feels the redemptive process. And everything that happens after 1967 for him is going backwards. This is a photo of Rav Goren with you see him in the back with his beard, the only beard in the entire picture from all the generals of IDF. Oh, yeah. So it's a fuzzy picture. You can recognize two people, Rav Goren because of his beard, Moshe Dayan because of the patch. And Ben Gurion because of the hair. But you don't know if it's Einstein or Ben Gurion. Rav Goren ends his tenure in 1968 in the army. He gets elected to the post of the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. The person who serves by his side as the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv is a lesser known figure at that time, a Sephardic chief rabbi, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, which starts a very complicated relationship for the rest of his life. Both of them were brilliant. But for Rav Goren, who was used to the army entourage and having army jeeps and having dozens of soldiers listening to his command and having a whole armed force of the rabbinate of people who literally follow his every instruction, now he's coming to the big city, to Tel Aviv. Now his job is not to blow the shofar in Har Sinai. Now his job is to fight with the Hilton Hotel, not to have a party on a Friday night which falls on the 31st of December. Now his job is to fight with the market owners in Tel Aviv who want to sell not kosher meat. And he doesn't enjoy that as much. This is not as fun as what he was doing before. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef relates a story that they had offices right near each other. And, they came to him with a question in kashrut. And he was a brilliant scholar. And he starts speaking to the people about, it could be this way or that way. For a whole hour he goes back and forth. And the secretary realizes that Rabbi Goren is not going to give these merchants an answer. So she goes to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, do you mind just going in and helping him out? So he goes in and they suggest maybe we should say it's allowed. He says, oh yeah, that's a good idea. They finally they're able to leave. Rabbi Ovadia is a more practical halachic decisor when it comes for, is the kitchen kosher or treif? Rabbi Goren is busy bringing proofs from the Jerusalem Talmud right and left. The chief rabbi of Tel Aviv is only a stepping stone. He's a national hero in Israel. There are songs composed about him. Okay, there are stamps with his face on it. He's offered to run for the chief rabbi of Israel. Now this is a very interesting election. It's the first time the chief rabbis of Israel, it used to be that it was a for life position. Rav Kook served for his entire life until 1935, until he's passed away. Rabbi Herzog served until he passed away in 1959. The two chief rabbis following that was Rabbi Unterman and Rabbi Nissim. And the government decides to limit the term to 10 years to make a new election. And it makes it complicated because basically, but it allowed the previous chief rabbis to run in the election. Rabbi Goren wins the election by an astounding majority. Guess who becomes chief rabbi together with him? Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is also a fascinating personality that deserves at least 2 classes on his own. The election of the chief rabbi is very complicated because of a personal story of 2 siblings, Miriam and Chanoch Langer. Have you ever heard that name, yes or no? Miriam and Chanoch Langer are 2 secular Israelis who worked in the IDF, who served in the IDF, and they happened to be stationed right near Moshe Dayan's office. They had a problem. Their mother, whose name was Chava Ginsburg, was married in Poland in 1923 to Bulek Borakowski. And she left, they moved to Israel essentially, and she remarried someone else without getting a religious divorce from her husband. Now, she had 2 children from her second husband, Shmuel Langer. Now, what happens if you have a child from another person without getting a divorce? It's a very unfortunate situation, being a mamzer, which literally means bastard in English. They come to the religious court in Petach Tikva in 1966, and they forbid them from getting married. They go to Moshe Dayan. Moshe Dayan is touched by their story. He gets them a personal meeting with Golda Meir, who's the prime minister. Golda Meir hears them out, and this becomes the number 1 issue in the state of Israel. Ha'ach v'achot langer, could they remarry? And this takes out all the tensions between the religious and the secular communities. As you know, the chief rabbinate has complete monopoly over the personal status of the citizens of Israel. They have a complete monopoly over conversions, marriages, and divorces. And here you have 2 Israeli soldiers who don't have ability to get married. This goes back and forth. This goes to the Supreme Court and goes back to the local court. Now, why is this a question? Because this is a very complex story. Bulek Borakowski was not Jewish. They got married in 1923 in Poland. Chava Ginsburg was a nice Jewish girl. She got married first time in the church with Bulek Borakowski. Her parents were devastated. They convinced him to convert. He converted to Judaism. The question is who, where, how, and why. And they moved together to Israel. After Rav Goren gets elected, this is the first major case that comes to his table. Rav Goren comes and he builds a coalition against him in a way that neither Rav Kook, or maybe Rav Kook did, or Rav Herzog never had such great opposition as Rav Goren had. And this is one of the most difficult times. You have to understand, in the army, he was the sole boss. He was the only rabbi. When you're in Jerusalem, sitting in Eichal Shlomo with 4,000 rabbis living on the same block, it's a different problem. It's a different story. Rabbi Eliashiv, who serves on the Supreme Court, resigns. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef goes against his decision. And he gets attacked on all fronts. The Lubavitcher Rebbe attacks him. Rav Moshe Feinstein attacks him. Every single leading authority literally says it's an invalid decision. Now, why were they so adamantly against it? My personal understanding, there was a few things that were connected. Many people suspected, again, this was never proven, that he was promised, it was a deal that was made with Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan, that if he wants to be elected as Chief Rabbi of Israel, he has to solve this case. And the Haredim felt that, some people felt that he did it for the job. Even those who didn't feel like he did it for the job felt like this was an attack on traditional Judaism, and he became the immediate favorite. He did it for popularity reasons, and they doubt his character on it. Rav Goren puts out an entire book. This is the book that he puts out, with proofs, the discussion. He sat down with Bolek Borokovsky and asked him, do you know how to say Shema Yisrael? He did not know exactly how to say it. He didn't know the Lechadodi, but he did come to shul. The people who came to shul said, some people said he didn't look like he did anything. He was just standing there. You know, if you're in shul, if you're Jewish, you have to shmooze. If you're not schmoozing, you're not, either shmooze or you daven. He's literally going to the nitty gritty, trying to prove that Bolek Borokovsky's conversion is not a legal conversion, that it's not clear who were the people who converted him back in Poland in the 1920s, and therefore there's no problem. He has other rabbis who sign off on it, but they're too scared to publicize their name. Because they know if their name goes public, it might be the end of their career, their kids might get expelled out of schools, they'll be personally attacked. One person is not scared to put his name on the book, and that's Rabbi Shlomo Goren. This is a poster that goes down in Jerusalem. So in Jerusalem, there's signs of a terrible tragedy that just happened. For some reason, for the last 100 years, every single day you go to Jerusalem, there's always a terrible tragedy happening. And this time, the senior rabbis of the ultra-Orthodox, they write, Likroet b'gadav, you have to tear your clothing. יצא איש שנבחר לרב הראשי של הרבנות הראשית הציונית, לעקור לנו את התורה, לא יבוא ממזר בקהל השם. He's allowing bastards to come to the community. He doesn't care about Jewish law. He's just caring about the Zionist state. Blah, 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 blah. There are caricatures in the newspapers. This is against his brother-in-law, that his brother-in-law helped him in order to become the chief rabbi of Haifa. This is a vicious personal attack on his character. This is the day he gets elected with Chief Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. At the time of the election, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is a hardly known figure. He's also a brilliant scholar, a very different type of brilliance. Both have an amazing memory. Their relationship is less than perfect. Both of them are historic figures for the Jewish people. Both of them have shaped the state of Israel more than anyone else in the religious world in the last 50 years. But their relationship is not good, but they serve together as chief rabbis. There was a complaint. Rav Ovadia Yosef felt that Rabbi Goren was making fun of him because he would often speak to the leaders of the state in Yiddish. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef did not know how to speak Yiddish. Ben Gurion spoke Yiddish, Moshe Dayan spoke Yiddish, Menachem Begin spoke Yiddish. So over here you could see Menachem Begin speaking to Rabbi Goren. Very often he could speak to him in Yiddish and Rabbi Goren feels left out of the conversation. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef feels left out of the conversation. This is a picture of Rav Goren and Yitzchak Rabin. Just, when someone writes a biography, okay, more or less you could write on every decade more or less the same amount. In Rabbi Goren's biography, 97% of the book is until 1968. After 1968, it's 4 pages. Just so you understand. He feels alienated not only by the ultra-religious, he gets to feel alienated by the leaders of the state of Israel. He attacks Oslo. He thinks this is the destruction for the Jewish people. He's viciously opposed to return of any land for peace. He does not forgive Moshe Dayan for returning the Temple Mount to the Waqf. In his personal regrets, he says, maybe I did not fight Moshe Dayan enough. Maybe I should have done something more. In a way, he's going into retreat. As he's going into retreat, there's a whole movement of the Hitashvut, of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. Rav Kook's ideology is being taken in a way and being put a focus on Eretz Yisrael Shlima. He has a yeshiva called Yeshivat Ha'idra, which means Goren in Aramaic. But he dies in 1993. At the last years, he already has very little influence on the Israeli public. The way he influenced the IDF, he shaped it for until this very day. The religion of the IDF is completely to the benefits of, to the schut, to the credits of Rav Goren. But afterwards, he struggles to find a voice within the government. He struggles to find a voice within the state of Israel that will follow his ideas. He becomes, in a way, a general without soldiers. Even the Mafdal, the religious Zionist movement, does not stay loyal to him at the end of his days. This is the biography that was written through his words by Avi Rothfuss. It's a great biography, everyone must read it. He is the one who decided that the Yom HaZikaron should be the day before Yom HaAtzmaut. This was his decision. And those happy moments and sad moments come in his life hand in hand. As he liberates the Kotel, and then 2 days later he'll be identifying bodies of Israeli soldiers. And he didn't know what day to choose for the Memorial Day for the Paris soldiers of the IDF. He thought maybe to do it on Lag BaOmer, because that's when the soldiers of Bar Kokhba were killed. But he said Lag BaOmer is the joyous day. He didn't want to mix it with the sad day. Maybe Tisha B'Av. He did not want to mix the destruction of the temple with the death of soldiers. Maybe it should be on Yom Kippur. At the end, the year passes. It's 1949. It's 3 days before Yom HaAtzmaut. And he walks into the office and he tells the chief of staff that we have no choice. We have to make it the day before Yom HaAtzmaut. He says, I thought of Simchat Torah. In Israel, you have Simchat Torah and Yizkor on the same day. You can have a cantor chanting the Yizkor right before, right during the time as you're doing the Hakafot. Jews could dance and weep at the same time. And he says, therefore, maybe we could also do that too. Maybe we could follow the state of Israel in that as well. This is one of my favorite photos of Rav Goren. This is secular Israeli soldiers, probably, in the Israeli Air Force, giving a salute to Rav Goren. You see an old rabbi, a brilliant Torah scholar, staring into the face of young Israeli pilots. This is his picture without his uniform. He's less comfortable in his rabbinic garb. This is the garb he's more comfortable with. It's the soldier's uniform, the general's hat, and the talit, wrapping himself. At every point of his life, he tries to combine the state and his religion. He feels that he continues the mission of Rav Kook. The day he was elected as chief rabbi, he came to the tomb of Rav Kook at the Mount of Olives and he said, I'm not worthy to be in your seat. Even though as a child he decided he will be one day chief rabbi. But he said, I'm not worthy to be in your seat. Please give me the strength to be able to influence the Jewish people as much as I can. Thank you very much. Yes.
We learned about Harabaya, we did with Diane, but what was the outcome? I've been to Machpelah, I don't know how many times. What was the outcome of Diane trying to remove the Jews from hold religious Jewish rights from the Machpelah? Obviously.
So Rav Goren takes it to his credit. Rav Goren takes it to his credit that Jews could pray today in the cave of the patriarchs. Moshe Dayan gave in. He challenges himself that he should have fought Moshe Dayan on the Temple Mount.
So he did win on the
No, you can go to the Marat HaMarpelah, the big tomb, Oel Yitzchak, which has a the biggest tomb. We cannot go in there. We can only go into Abraham and Jacob.
As Dr. Reich says that till today, the Marat HaMarpelah also serves as a mosque, and that holds regular prayers, and it has a muazzin in there as well, as you know, as you see in the picture. But it also has a prayer place for Jews to pray. Anyone else? Alan?
What was the final result of that Holocaust?
They married. They married. After Rav Goren gave the permission, they were able to get married. The day after he gave the permission, the chief rabbi of the IDF married them. The problem was that Bolig Barakovsky came to the state and says, I want to be recognized as a Jew. And they recognized him as a Jew too, so the ultra-Orthodox used it, this is a joke. You have to decide, you can't eat the cake and have it full. But after his decision, they're able to remarry. Cantor Malavani, could I ask you to share a personal, as someone who knew Rav Goren well?
I don't want to disturb you. You were outstanding, but I have a lot to tell about it. A lot.
Usually people ask Cantor Malavani to sing, but I'm asking him to speak.
First of all, I want to congratulate you so much. You were outstanding. Outstanding. I think you painted an outstanding picture of Rabbi Goren. Those who know me know my closeness with him. He was my boss in the army. I was a captain of the Israeli army. And after that, in Johannesburg, in London, and here in New York, he was at our home all the time. You explained so many things, and I made so many notes, which I think I can also speak for at least 2 sessions, but I'm not going to do it, obviously. And a couple of anecdotes could be very, very interesting. Yes, towards the end of his life, he was depressed. He shared with me a lot. He sat one day at our home the whole day and he cried. He was a man, as you painted him, as Rav Mamlachti. To him, the rabbinate and the state were the same thing. He realized and recognized that the state of Israel is the realization, or at least the beginning of the realization of the prophecies. But let me tell you a couple of very, very beautiful, I made some notes, beautiful stories. For example, I did many weddings with him. You know, in the army, the chief rabbi has to do weddings and unfortunately funerals also of soldiers. When we used to stand under the chuppah, and you know in Israel everybody pushes, one on top of the other, on top of the other. So he always used to say, please, those who do not get married, please move away. That was his classic thing. Another story, the last year that I served under him, I did the Seder in Eilat with him. And there were about 5,000 soldiers. I don't have to tell you, no microphone, no nothing. I went to the unit before to teach some of the guys the melodies of the Haggadah. And who was at the Seder? Golda Meir, Eshkol, you mentioned all the names, you showed pictures of them. It touched me so much. Moshe Dayan, a lot of them. He suddenly turns to Moshe Dayan and he says to him, Moshe, why don't you taste the gefilte fish which my Rebbetzin cooked? So Moshe Dayan says to him, why should I do that? I ate the gefilte fish from the army. He said, no, but my Rebbetzin did. So Moshe Dayan was quite a character and not stupid. He said, Rav Goren, you gave the hechsher of the Pesach Seder and the food, I eat this food. What you do at your home is your own business. I am a witness to that. On another, you were talking about Yitzhak Rabin. I happen to have been friendly with Yitzhak Rabin, and my wife, she just went, oh, you're there. Yitzhak Rabin, we were at his home in Tel Aviv quite a few times, and arguing. One day, at the Matkal, Matkal means the headquarters of the Israeli army in Tel Aviv. We were in Israel, and Rav Goren, I think it was 1991, 92, something like that, when Rabin was prime minister. Rav Goren went over to him with a finger. I'm surprised that there is no picture of that. With a finger, pointing, Yitzchak. He said to him in Ivrit, in Hebrew, Ma kara lecha? What happened to you? So Yitzhak Rabin says, what are you talking about? Oh, Yitzhak, you know very well. You went to Oslo and you are giving everything back. So Rabin said to him, it's not me, it's Shimon Peres. So Rav Goren said, I already settled with Shimon Peres. Now I have to settle with you. What happened to you? You cannot do it. And he told him off, and Yitzhak Rabin, like a little yingale, like a little boy, stood there, didn't say a word. Rav Goren felt good at that time. Mount Scopus, Har HaTzofim, Mount Scopus was at that time, of course, part of the Jordanian. It was an Israeli conclave surrounded by the Jordanian. But there were Israeli soldiers there. So one day, about a week before Pesach, Rav Goren says to me, you have to go to Har HaTzofim to teach them how to do the Seder. So I said, okay, so what do I have to do? He says, first of all, swear to me that it's a secret, you don't say a word to anybody. Not to your parents. I was a kid. How old was I? 19. And I was brought to Jerusalem, to the Mandelbaum gate. I'm sure that the Israelis remember it very well. The two Dr. Reich and others. And they put a piece of something on my eyes, and they put me into a Jordanian armed truck, and they took me to Har HaTzofim, to Mount Scopus. Then they took off the thing, and I was there for 3 days. On the second day, we suddenly saw from top a helicopter. And Rav Goren he went down and down and down with the helicopter, and then they let down some kind of a rope, and he came down on the rope to the Mount Scopus. But he was dressed not with his army uniform. He was dressed as a civil. And I said, Rav Goren, what is this? No, I wanted to check that you are doing the right thing. I said, well, Rav Goren, don't you trust me? Anyway, that was also an unbelievable. I'm writing now a book, and it will all come very much. I think that I have so many more. By the way, you were talking, and you were right, the story of the brother and the sister. I want you to know that I was involved with that.
By the way, everyone, there's going to be a special charge for this because this is not included in the original price.
So
This is a bonus.
the money goes to the charity box at the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. When the story erupted, he was beside himself. But he told me that he was going to resolve it. Years back, when I was a chazan in London, there was a member of my shul who had a problem with his son, who was going out with a girl. It's a long story, I don't want to go into that. And the girl was declared by the London Beth Din that she is a bastard because of the behavior of the mother. And my uncle was then the chief rabbi of Holland. He lived in Den Haag, Rav Be'eri. And the family was beside themselves. And my uncle came out with a psak halacha, with a religious decision that according to his understanding, it's okay, she can be kosher. Why? Because he created doubts as to the behavior of the mother of that girl. He saw the passport, she traveled, who knows what. He sent it to Reb Moshe, and Reb Moshe paskened that that girl in London is kosher and she can get married, and a week later, my rabbi in London and myself married her. I have at home a whole file, maybe I'll show it to you one day, about the whole case. I gave it to Rabbi Goren, and he based the decision about the husband from Poland who was a goy, converted. He based it on the issue of doubts. The more doubts, the easier to resolve. And that's exactly what really happened. So I had a lot to do with it.
Thank you very much.
I'll give another lecture in my own school. You're all invited.
Any other question?
Now with the rabbinate, a different rabbinate.
Well, they're accepted. The chief rabbinate accepted it. He sealed it in.
Oh, good.
Yes, Charlie.
I've always been bitter about Diane's handing over the keys, but someone told me that he was really following the advice of Orthodox rabbis who felt that we should not have it until Mashiach comes. So was it?
I don't think Dayan was in. You're asking if Dayan based his decision based on rabbinic decision. I don't think so. I think it was based on political and his perspective, his geopolitical view. I just want to share with you one final statement. Rabbi Goren is a person who always challenged authority. That was his great strength, and that was his great weakness. The reason he didn't care about what all the other rabbis say, because he followed his own truth. At the end of his days, he said that if the commanders command you to lefanot yeshuvim, you do not have to listen to the command of your army, which became very controversial and problematic. My father told me he remembers Rav Goren once at a wedding, and I'll finish with this anecdote. And Rav Goren was a modern Orthodox rabbi, but he was very strict when it came to certain things, and he didn't want to recite the blessing under the chuppah. He felt that the way the bride was dressed was not appropriate. So a normal rabbi, would turn away to the other side. You say the blessing, but not someone like Rav Goren. The same person who didn't care what all the other great rabbis of generation would say, he also didn't care what everyone else would say at the wedding. My father was at the wedding. The husband was wearing a kittel. You know what's a kittel?
Yeah.
So Rav Goren takes the mic in front of all the 500 guests of one of the leaders of American Jewry, and he says, maybe instead of the chassan wearing the kittel, maybe the kallah should wear the kittel. And that's what happened. And that's how we officiated the wedding. That was his personality. He didn't take commandments from anyone. He followed his truth. It brought him to the great successes, but it also brought him into trouble. But he has played a tremendous role in the history of the Jewish people in the last 50 years. Thank you very much.